I had barely lifted my glass when she seized the microphone. My new daughter-in-law, still glowing in her wedding dress, looked straight at me with a smirk that cut deeper than any knife. Her words were loud, sharp, designed to pierce. "This is my worthless father-in-law we're forced to endure." Laughter erupted like cruel fireworks all around me, crashing in my ears. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me as if I were some exhibit in a cage. The chandeliers glittered above, but all I felt was the heavy burn of humiliation running down my spine. I wanted to sink into the floor, disappear under the polished tables, anything to escape their mocking stares. My hands trembled against the stem of my glass, the liquid rippling like my pride. And in that instant, as her family roared with laughter, I caught the look on my son's face. Daniel's eyes darted nervously, his jaw clenched, torn between loyalty to me and his new bride. My heart cracked seeing him frozen like that, powerless. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing myself to stay still. You know, I share these stories because I believe truth deserves to be told. And what came after this moment? It silenced the entire hall. Subscribe now, because you won't want to miss what happened when the tables turned. The air smelled of perfume, champagne, and roasted meat. Yet to me, it stank of arrogance. Each burst of laughter was a dagger. My daughter-in-law's friends leaned close to one another, whispering and pointing. Their manicured fingers and sparkling jewels caught the light, but all I saw was ugliness. I tried to breathe slowly, in through my nose, out through my mouth, like Evelyn once taught me. My late wife's voice echoed in my memory. "Dignity, Charles. Never let them see you fall." Those words were my anchor in that storm of shame. The microphone squealed as she handed it back to the DJ, still grinning as if she'd just told the funniest joke in the world. I clenched my fist around the silver keychain Evelyn gave me years ago. My only shield, small and hidden, pressed against my palm. I didn't speak. I didn't rise to defend myself. The silence I held became heavier than any insult, but my chest burned with the need to shout, to tell them exactly who I was and what power I carried behind my quiet face. Her father sat only a few tables away, a large man with slicked back hair and a smug smile, basking in his daughter's cruelty as if it were entertainment. He raised his glass toward me mockingly, a silent toast to my humiliation. I stared back at him, unblinking, and then something changed. His expression shifted. The arrogance drained, replaced by a sudden stiffness in his jaw. His glass paused mid-air, his knuckles whitening around the stem. I noticed his breath catch. His laughter stopped dead. The color left his face as his eyes stayed locked on mine. For a brief second, confusion rippled through me. Why was he looking at me like that? The crowd still chuckled, oblivious, but her father couldn't move. His pupils shrank, his lips twitched, as though words were stuck in his throat. That's when I realized he knew me. He recognized me. My mind spun back through the boardroom weeks earlier, the signatures, the votes, the transfer of power, Clarion Holdings. His empire wasn't his anymore. He hadn't known whose hands it had fallen into. Until now. I sipped from my glass, letting the wine linger on my tongue. My humiliation cooled, replaced by a quiet satisfaction. He was trapped, caught in his own pride, and only he and I knew it in that moment. But his daughter? She stood tall, laughing with her bridesmaids, blind to the storm forming at her father's side. Her smugness had no idea what was about to unravel. Daniel leaned closer to me, whispering nervously, "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know she'd—" His voice cracked. I placed a hand on his arm, silencing him with just a gentle squeeze. The band struck up another tune, violins and piano filling the air, masking the tension only a few of us could feel. My son's bride danced away, her dress trailing, a vision of vanity. She thought she had won. Her father avoided my eyes now, fumbling with his napkin, sweat beading at his hairline despite the air-conditioned hall. His hand trembled so badly he nearly dropped his fork. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding but face calm. For the first time that night, I felt a shift in the air. Power was no longer with the mockers. It had quietly slid into my hands, though no one else yet understood. The laughter dimmed in my ears, replaced by the sound of Evelyn's voice in my memory. Patience, Charles. They'll reveal themselves. She was right. They already had. One guest at a nearby table tilted his head, studying me. His brows furrowed, as though recognition tugged at the edge of his memory. He opened his mouth, hesitating. My stomach tightened. The music swelled louder. The chandeliers gleamed brighter, and every detail of that hall sharpened in my senses. The clink of glasses, the rustle of silk gowns, the shallow laughter now sounding strained. The night had only just begun. And just when I thought the humiliation had passed, I heard her voice again, clear, sharp, and cutting through the music. She was about to speak into the microphone once more. My pulse hammered in my ears. She smiled wickedly, raising her glass, preparing for another cruel toast. This time, she wasn't going to stop at calling me worthless. Her laugh pierced through the music like broken glass, and again she seized the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice dripping with sweetness that masked the venom underneath. "We are so lucky to have Daniel's father here with us tonight. Isn't it beautiful when even the poor can celebrate love?" Gasps and chuckles rippled across the room. My heart twisted. I felt the air tighten around me, like invisible hands gripping my throat. The chandeliers gleamed above, throwing shards of light across the polished floor. All I could hear was the cruel rhythm of laughter blending with the violins. I tasted bitterness on my tongue, though no food had touched my lips. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside me, his face pale, his hands fidgeting with the napkin in his lap. I wanted to reach for him, to remind him that none of this was his fault, but the shame he carried on his shoulders mirrored my own, pressing him down until he seemed smaller than the man I raised. The microphone crackled as she leaned closer. "You know," she said with a sly grin, "when I first met Charles, I honestly thought he was the gardener. Didn't you?" Laughter erupted, cruel and sharp, like applause for her twisted performance. My fingers tightened around the stem of my glass until I feared it might shatter. Her father forced a smile, but I saw it, his knuckles tapping nervously against the table, his jaw clenching. He couldn't bear to look at me. For all his wealth and arrogance, he already knew the truth simmering beneath the surface. He recognized the name Bennett, though his daughter had not. I inhaled slowly, the scent of wine and roasted lamb mixing with something darker. Burnt pride, humiliation, rage I forced down deep. Every second I stayed silent was another second. Her cruelty grew bolder. And yet every second also pulled her father closer to the moment of reckoning. If you've ever been laughed at for something they didn't understand, your clothes, your job, your silence, you know this ache. And what came after? It turned the entire room upside down. Subscribe now, because you won't believe how quickly arrogance collapses when truth stands tall. My mind wandered for a heartbeat to Evelyn. Her laugh had been gentle, never mocking. She used to say, "Charles, people show who they are in the smallest cruelties." I remembered her words as I watched this woman, my son's bride, tear me apart for sport. She was showing me exactly who she was. The bridesmaids leaned toward one another, their sequined dresses sparkling as they whispered. Their laughter wasn't joyous. It was hollow, sharp-edged, like glass breaking underfoot. Every whisper carried weight, pressing into me, daring me to break. The band played on, pretending not to notice, but I caught the violinist glancing at me, pity in his eyes. Even strangers felt the sting of what she was doing. That silent acknowledgement gave me strength. I wasn't invisible. Not completely. Daniel finally muttered, "Please, stop!" But his voice was drowned out by applause from the head table. He lowered his eyes, ashamed, powerless, and my heart ached for him more than for myself. He was trapped between love and loyalty, a cruel place for any son to stand. Her father cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. His fork scraped against the plate, though no food was left. He wanted to stop her. I could see it, but pride held him back. To silence her would be to admit her target mattered. To him, that was weakness. The glass in my hand caught the light. My reflection stared back at me. Aged skin, tired eyes, but steady, stronger than I felt. I whispered inside myself, Hold on, Charles. Just a little longer. Then she leaned closer again, the microphone too near her painted lips. Imagine, she said, dragging out the word, being his age, with nothing to show for it. No house worth bragging about, no car, no legacy except Daniel. She laughed cruelly, her hand squeezing my son's shoulder. That cut deepest. She had touched what mattered most. Daniel stiffened under her grip, his eyes blazing with shame. I wanted to rise, to pull him away from her, but I stayed rooted. My silence wasn't weakness. It was a storm gathering strength. Around the room, the whispers grew louder. A few guests exchanged glances, uneasy. It wasn't just humor anymore, it was cruelty, raw and sharp. Some smiled nervously, unsure if they should laugh or look away. And then, for the first time, I saw it. Doubt flickering in her eyes. A brief hesitation. A shadow across her smile. Perhaps she sensed the tension coiling? The way her father's gaze burned into me but never softened. Something she couldn't yet name was unraveling. I leaned back, letting the chair creak under my weight. My hands steadied, though my chest still burned. Power shifted in that moment, invisible to most, but undeniable to those who truly watched. Her cruelty was no longer a weapon. It was a spotlight, exposing her. The clink of glasses slowed. The laughter thinned. Even the music seemed unsure, as if the violinist's bow hesitated over the strings. The air felt heavy, as though everyone sensed a shift, but didn't yet understand it. Her father dabbed his forehead with a napkin. He whispered something to his wife, too low for others to hear, but his eyes betrayed panic. He knew exactly who I was. He knew the weight I carried behind my silence. Daniel finally looked at me, his lips trembling as if to say something. But before he could, another guest spoke, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Wait, isn't that Charles Bennett? From Clarion?" The words struck like a bell. Forks clattered, conversations stopped mid-sentence, and every head turned toward me. The name lingered in the air, sharp, undeniable. Her father's face drained of color. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I only let the silence spread, heavier than her laughter, stronger than her cruelty. And in that silence, I saw her mask falter for the first time. Her smile froze. Her grip on Daniel's shoulder loosened. She glanced between me and her father, confusion twisting her perfect features. The cracks had begun to show, and just as she opened her mouth to ask something, just as the truth dangled dangerously close, her father slammed his hand against the table, the sound echoing like thunder. The entire hall fell silent. The sound of his palm striking the table cut through the air like a gunshot. Glasses rattled, silverware trembled, and every head snapped in his direction. His face was pale, eyes wide, sweat glistening on his forehead under the chandelier's light. He hadn't meant to lose control, but he had. I stared at him calmly, the way one watches a storm approach across an open field. My hands rested flat against the tablecloth, steady, betraying none of the fire churning inside me. He avoided my eyes, but his silence screamed louder than any insult his daughter had just hurled. The mask of arrogance was cracking. Gasps whispered through the crowd. "What's wrong with him?" someone murmured. Another voice, curious, hesitant, repeated the name that had been spoken earlier. Bennett. It rolled across the hall like thunder, heavy, undeniable. My daughter-in-law froze, her painted smile stiff as wax. Daniel looked between us, his lips parting as if he might finally understand. His hand trembled against his glass of water. He whispered, "Dad, what's happening?" I couldn't answer him, not yet. It wasn't the time. Some truths needed silence to gather weight before they fell. Her father's chair scraped loudly as he pushed back. The sound cut through the music, forcing the band to stop mid-note. Every eye in the room watched him stand, his napkin dropping to the floor unnoticed. He opened his mouth, but no words came out, just a dry gasp, like a man drowning in air. I remembered boardrooms filled with polished wood and sharp suits, remembered signatures that shifted empires with the stroke of a pen. I had signed his fate not weeks ago, quietly, without spectacle. He hadn't known whose hand held the pen, until now. I leaned slightly forward, catching his eyes with mine. No words, just the truth pressed silently between us. He blinked rapidly, as though he could shake the recognition away. But there it was, the undeniable fact of my ownership, my power, cloaked behind the jacket he once mocked. "Father, are you all right?" My daughter-in-law's voice rang across the room, but it carried no warmth. Her tone was sharp, irritated, as though his fear embarrassed her. She didn't yet see the truth pressing down on him, choking him. She thought it was weakness. The guests shifted uneasily, whispering among themselves. Some were curious, others gleeful, sensing scandal. Wealthy people always smelled blood in the water, and tonight they thought it was mine. They didn't yet understand whose empire was bleeding. If you've ever been underestimated, laughed at for your silence or your plain clothes, you'll know this feeling. It's like holding lightning in your chest, waiting for the right moment to strike. Subscribe now, because what came next shocked even me, when one secret word turned the entire hall upside down. Daniel reached for me under the table. His hand clutched mine, small compared to the boy he once was, strong compared to the man trapped in shame tonight. I squeezed back gently. My silence wasn't cowardice. It was protection. He didn't need to carry the storm. Her father finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Clarion," he muttered, barely audible. But the room was so quiet, even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. The words sliced through the silence like a blade. Recognition rippled across faces, widening eyes, straightening backs. The bride blinked, confused. "Clarion? What does that mean?" Her ignorance dripped in every syllable, yet no one dared laugh this time. Her father's trembling hands betrayed too much. He was terrified. I lowered my gaze, staring at the ruby wine in my glass. Its surface rippled slightly from the tension. I wanted them to think, wanted the silence to stretch until their own minds painted the truth. That was the cruelest weapon of all, making them see it themselves. Finally, someone near the back whispered, "Isn't Clarion Holdings the firm that bought—" Their voice cut off as realization dawned. Heads turned back to me. Suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore. My daughter-in-law's cheeks flushed, her perfect smile faltering. "No," she said sharply. "That's ridiculous. He's nothing." Her words fell flat, lifeless in the silence. No laughter followed this time. Even her bridesmaids shifted uncomfortably, their glittering dresses losing their shine. Her father collapsed back into his chair, his shoulders slumped, his forehead slick with sweat. He looked smaller now, as though the weight of the truth pressed him into the floor. He couldn't deny it. Not here. Not with the whispers spreading like wildfire. Daniel's grip on my hand tightened. He looked at me with new eyes, confused, but no longer ashamed. He wanted answers. I wasn't ready to give them, not yet. He needed to see, to feel, the contrast between their cruelty and my silence. The bride turned on her father, her voice shrill. "Why are you acting like this? It's just him." She pointed at me with venom, but the gesture only revealed her ignorance. She didn't see the storm swallowing her father whole. The hall filled with a thick, suffocating quiet. The music had stopped, the laughter had died, and even the air felt heavy with expectation. Every guest sat on the edge of revelation. They wanted a show. They wanted blood. I looked around slowly, meeting eyes one by one. Some turned away instantly. Others held my gaze only long enough to falter. Respect was already shifting, even without words. They felt it. Power doesn't need to shout. It only needs to stand. Evelyn's voice whispered in my memory again. "Patience, Charles. Let them bury themselves." I pressed the keychain in my palm, grounding myself. She was right. They were already knee-deep in the grave of their own arrogance. The bride clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, her mask finally breaking. She looked at her father, her eyes wide now with fear instead of mockery. She realized something was wrong. Very wrong. And then, just as the silence reached its peak, a man at the far end of the hall stood up. His voice boomed with authority, carrying across the hushed crowd. "That man," he said, pointing straight at me, "owns every seat on your father's board." Gasps erupted. Wine glasses tipped. Forks clattered. Whispers surged like waves crashing against stone. The truth wasn't whispered anymore. It was shouted. and no one could laugh it away. My daughter-in-law's face drained of color. She stared at me as though seeing me for the first time, her lips parting, her breath shallow. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Her world had cracked in half. Her father bowed his head, unable to deny it, his hands shaking violently on the table. His empire was mine. His pride was dust. His daughter's cruelty had exposed him before everyone. And just as the truth lit the room ablaze, Daniel whispered in my ear, his voice trembling. "Dad, why didn't you tell me?" I turned to him, my heart pounding. But before I could answer, the bride's voice sliced through the chaos, high, sharp, and trembling with rage. "If this is true," she screamed, "then you've been lying to all of us." The hall erupted again, voices clashing, questions flying, and at the center of it all, I sat still, calm as stone, watching the storm break around me. Because I knew something they didn't. This wasn't the end of the humiliation. It was only the beginning. Her scream echoed off the marble walls, shattering whatever brittle glamour was left in that hall. The chandelier's crystals trembled as if they too were afraid. People gasped and clutched their drinks, staring at her with a mix of curiosity and horror. Her wedding dress, once glowing like an untouchable cloud, now looked like a costume slipping off. I kept my eyes fixed on the wine in my glass, its deep red swirling like a storm. The room felt suspended between two heartbeats, every sound magnified. The clink of a spoon, the shuffle of a heel, the shallow breath of 100 guests. She had thought she was controlling the narrative, but her own outburst had torn her mask apart. Daniel sat rigid beside me, his fingers gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. He was shaking, though he tried to hide it, his chest rising and falling too fast. He glanced at me, his eyes begging for an explanation, for some sign of what to do, but I only shook my head gently. Not yet. Her father lifted his trembling hands as if to calm her. "Stop," he hissed under his breath, but she was too far gone, her pride and panic colliding like sparks in dry grass. She turned on him, her voice high and breaking. "You knew about this? You knew who he was and didn't tell me?" The whispers spread like a living thing, curling around the tables, climbing up the white drapes. Names were spoken, numbers, rumors, Clarion Holdings, buyouts, boardrooms. My anonymity, my protection for decades, was dissolving under the heat of this spectacle. Yet I remained still. That was the only power I needed. The band had stopped pretending. Instruments sat abandoned on chairs. The violinist rubbed his palms together nervously, eyes darting between me and the bride. Even the waiters froze in the doorways. Trays balanced mid-air. The hall was a stage, and everyone had been forced into a role they hadn't rehearsed. She slammed her fist onto the table, knocking over a glass of champagne. It spilled across the linen like liquid gold, dripping onto the floor with soft splashes. "All this time," she hissed, "you let me humiliate him. You let me call him nothing." Her mascara smeared as tears welled. But they weren't for me. They were for herself. Her father tried to speak again, but his voice cracked, betraying him. He sat down slowly, his shoulders sagging under a weight only he could feel. He looked older now, deflated, like a balloon losing air. His wealth couldn't shield him from this. Neither could his pride. Daniel's lips trembled. "Dad," he whispered, "please tell me the truth." His hand hovered over mine, unsure if he should reach for it. He was still my boy, but tonight he was a man seeing the world without illusions for the first time. I could feel Evelyn's keychain in my palm, warm despite the chill in the air. Her voice whispered inside me, "They'll reveal themselves, Charles. All you have to do is watch." She had always been right. The cruelty of others eventually unmasked itself. If you've ever been mocked by someone who didn't know your worth, you know this feeling, the quiet tremor of justice rising. And what unfolded after this moment changed everything, not just for me, but for Daniel. Subscribe now, because the next words spoken in that hall broke more than pride. They cracked an entire family open. I lifted my gaze at last, my eyes meeting hers. No anger, just a steady calm she couldn't bear. She flinched, her chin tilting downward. Her voice came out in a whisper now. "Who are you?" The question was genuine, stripped of arrogance, trembling. But before I could answer, one of the groomsmen near the door blurted out, "He's the man who signs your father's paychecks." The room gasped again. It wasn't rumor anymore. It was testimony. Her father buried his face in his hands, groaning. "Stop it," he murmured. But it was too late. The tide had turned. People were already on their phones, looking up my name, piecing the story together in real time. Secrets can't breathe under that kind of light. Daniel's fingers finally found mine. He squeezed hard, grounding himself. His eyes were wet, but not with shame, with something like awe. "All this time," he said softly, You never told me." His voice cracked on the last word. I squeezed back gently. "It wasn't the time," I murmured, but my voice was almost lost under the growing noise of whispers and shifting chairs. She wiped at her face, smearing makeup across her cheekbones. "Why would you come dressed like that?" She spat suddenly, a flash of her old cruelty returning. "Why come looking so small?" I tilted my head slightly, studying her as one might study a stranger. "Because it's who I am," I said quietly, though only she could hear. "I don't need to dress my worth." Her father's fork clattered to the ground. The sound echoed like a gunshot. He looked at me with something that almost resembled pleading. "Please," he whispered, "don't do anything here." The guests leaned closer, their curiosity devouring the space between us. The chandeliers flickered slightly as if the electricity itself was nervous. Even the scent of food had vanished from the air, replaced by the metallic taste of tension. I leaned back in my chair, my face still calm but my pulse racing. Evelyn's voice steadied me again. "Dignity outlasts arrogance." I repeated it under my breath like a prayer. Daniel turned to his wife, his voice low but shaking. "You humiliated my father in front of everyone." His words were sharp but quiet, like a blade slid under a door. She recoiled, blinking at him as though she didn't recognize the man speaking. The hall tilted on its axis. Loyalty was shifting. Masks were falling. And in that slow collapse, I felt the first real breath of freedom I'd had in years. Her father rose halfway from his chair again, his mouth opening, but no sound came. His face had gone chalk white. He swayed slightly, gripping the edge of the table for support. And then, just as the silence reached its sharpest edge, a voice from the back of the room shouted, "Security's here!" Every head turned. Two men in dark suits stepped into the hall, scanning the crowd with cold, unreadable eyes. They weren't part of the wedding. They were mine. The bride gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her father's knees buckled as he dropped back into his seat. Daniel stared at me, his eyes wide. I stood slowly, my chair scraping back across the polished floor. The keychain burned warm in my palm. The hall held its breath. Because whatever happened next would not just reveal the truth, it would decide the cost of it. The two men in dark suits stepped into the hall with quiet precision, like shadows given form. Their shoes made no sound on the marble, but their presence was thunder. Every guest straightened instinctively, their laughter dying in their throats. The chandeliers glinted off their sunglasses, though we were indoors. I didn't call them forward with a word. They already knew what to do. They stood near the entrance, one by the double doors, the other just behind my chair, hands clasped lightly in front of them. Their silence was heavier than the music had ever been. Everyone could feel the weight of an invisible line being drawn. My daughter-in-law's smile crumbled completely. Who are they?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Her eyes darted between them, then to me, like a child realizing the game was no longer hers. She looked so small in that enormous white dress, dwarfed by her own arrogance. Her father's hand shook as he grabbed his napkin, blotting sweat from his brow. "This isn't necessary," he muttered under his breath, but I heard him. The tremor in his voice betrayed not just fear, but recognition. He knew these weren't strangers. Daniel's eyes widened. He looked at me with a mix of fear and awe, his lips parting, but no words coming out. He had never seen me like this, never seen the veil slip even a little. Tonight, he was learning who his father really was. Not the man they mocked, but the man who had built and hidden an empire. The guests sat frozen. Some had phones out under the table, but none dared lift them openly. The two men in suits scanned the room, their expressions neutral, their posture relaxed, but coiled. The scent of fear was sharp, even over the expensive perfume and spilled champagne. Her voice cracked again. "Daniel," she hissed, tugging at his sleeve. "Tell your father to stop this." She was still clinging to a version of reality that had already dissolved. She hadn't yet realized no one at that table could stop what was coming. Her father finally spoke up, his voice shaking but louder this time. "Charles," he said, using my name for the first time all night. "We can discuss this privately." The words dripped desperation, an offer wrapped in politeness. I looked at him, calm, steady. "We are already discussing it," I said softly, but the microphone on the table caught my voice and sent it through the speakers, filling the hall. A ripple moved through the guests. He winced as though struck. "Not here," he hissed. His eyes flicked to the men in suits. "Not in front of everyone." The plea was naked now. His daughter stared at him, horror dawning. If you've ever seen someone's mask slip, watched arrogance turn to panic, you know the soundless thud it makes in a room. And what followed this moment cracked more than a reputation. Subscribe now, because the next word spoken shattered the illusion for good. Daniel squeezed my arm. "Dad," he whispered. "Please, what's happening?" His voice was trembling, but there was steel under it now. He wasn't just asking out of fear. He was demanding to know. I turned my face to him slowly, my eyes soft but unflinching. "The truth," I murmured, "always shows itself. Tonight you're seeing it." My voice was low, but he heard me. He sat back, his hand falling from my sleeve. The bride's lips trembled. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing this to us?" It was the first time she'd used the word us, the first crack in her certainty that she was untouchable. Her mascara had begun to run, black rivers down her cheeks. Her father pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly. He stood unsteadily, gripping the edge of the table for support. His voice rose, trying to reclaim authority. "Enough! This is my daughter's wedding. This show ends now." One of the men in suits shifted slightly, his jacket opening just enough to reveal a badge clipped inside. Not a weapon, just authority. Her father froze mid-sentence. He understood immediately. His power didn't extend here. The guests were whispering again, louder now. "Who is he? Why are they here? Is this a takeover?" The words buzzed around me like bees. I let them. Silence was my shield. Their curiosity was my blade. Daniel ran a hand over his face, his shoulders rising and falling with a heavy breath. "Dad," he said again, softer this time. "Tell me what you need me to do." There it was. Loyalty. Not confusion. Not shame. Loyalty. I reached for my glass, lifted it, and took a slow sip. The wine was warm, heavy on my tongue. I placed it down carefully. "Nothing yet," I murmured. "Just watch." Her father's knees trembled. He clutched the back of his chair like it might keep him standing. "Charles," he said again, voice cracking, "please, we can make this right." His daughter turned on him, eyes blazing with confusion. "Make what right?" she demanded. He couldn't answer. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. The guests were leaning forward, eyes hungry for the spectacle. Wealthy people love a fall, especially when it's not theirs. I felt Evelyn's keychain burn against my palm. "Dignity, Charles," she whispered in my memory. "Don't let them drag you down to their level." I exhaled slowly. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for truth. The bride's voice cracked again, softer now. "Daniel," she said, "what is your father?" She wasn't mocking anymore. She was frightened. She was finally asking the question she should have asked from the start. Daniel looked at me, waiting, his hands curled into fists. "Tell her," he whispered. Not to her, but to me. "Tell them all." The hall pulsed with anticipation. Even the air felt heavier, thicker. The men in suits stayed perfectly still, watching without blinking. The chandeliers flickered once, as if echoing the tremor running through the room. I stood slowly, my chair gliding back with a whisper on the polished floor. My heart was a hammer in my chest, but my face stayed calm. Every eye in the room locked onto me. Her father's breath hitched. "Charles," he said again, but his voice was barely a whisper now. "Don't." I looked at him, then at her, then at Daniel. I could feel 100 heartbeats pressing in, waiting for my next move. My silence had carried me this far. One sentence could end it, or begin something else entirely. And then, just as I parted my lips to speak, one of the men in suits stepped forward, his voice low but carrying. "Sir," he said to me, "we have the documents." A murmur rose through the hall like a wave. The bride gasped audibly. Her father swayed, gripping the table. Daniel stared at me, his pupils dilating. The man extended a thick, sealed envelope. Its corner caught the light. He placed it gently on the table before me. The hall went dead silent again. I rested my hand on the envelope, feeling its weight. Papers can topple empires, but this was heavier than paper. This was truth. Her father whispered one last word, so soft only I heard it. "Please." I looked at the envelope, then at Daniel. My fingers curled slowly under the flap. The hall held its breath, as if the walls themselves leaned closer. Because inside that envelope was more than proof. It was a fuse, and I was about to strike the match. I slid my thumb under the flap of the envelope, feeling the grain of the thick paper scratch against my skin. The seal broke with a soft crack, but the sound seemed to echo across the hall like a gunshot. Every eye fixed on my hands. No one dared breathe too loudly. It was as if the entire room tilted toward me. The scent of ink and paper rose as I lifted the documents out. Contracts, transfer agreements, board votes, all neatly stacked. My fingerprints smudged the edges as I flipped through. I had kept these hidden for weeks, waiting for a moment I hoped would never come. But now it was here, and everyone was watching. Her father's throat worked as he swallowed hard. "Don't do this," he whispered, barely audible. His hands trembled so badly he had to grip the edge of the table to steady himself. The arrogance he wore like a suit of armor was gone. All that remained was a man stripped bare. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes wide. "What is it?" he asked. His voice was low, but it carried. His wife turned to him, frantic, mascara streaking her cheeks. "Daniel, stop him!" she hissed. She still thought someone could stop the tide now crashing down. The men in suits didn't move. They stood like pillars, their faces impassive but their eyes sharp, scanning the crowd. Even the chandeliers seemed to flicker more softly, as if afraid to shine too bright on the moment of truth. I placed the stack on the white linen tablecloth. The papers looked stark against the soft glow of the candles, like bones on snow. The guests craned their necks to see. Someone at the back muttered, "What's going on?" Another whispered, "Clarion, it's true." I raised my eyes at last. "These," I said quietly, "are the documents your father signed." My voice was calm, but it carried through the microphone like a low drumbeat. "This is the company you've been bragging about all night." Her father's face crumpled. "Charles," he began, but his voice cracked. His daughter stared at me, then at him, the truth dawning across her features like a slow sunrise of horror. I turned a page, revealing the final signature. His signature, next to mine. "Clarion Holdings," I said, "acquired your company 3 weeks ago. I am now its majority shareholder. Your father works for me." Gasps rippled across the hall like a wave breaking. Wine glasses tipped, silverware clattered. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" Another covered their mouth, eyes wide. The bride's breath hitched audibly. Daniel blinked rapidly, his face pale. You own it?" he whispered. His voice was almost lost under the rising tide of murmurs, but I heard the tremor of awe inside it. Her father sagged into his chair. A man deflated. "I never—" he started, but stopped. There was no point. The papers on the table spoke louder than any excuse. The bride's voice cracked. "You lied to me," she hissed at her father. "You said we—" She broke off, shaking her head, as if she could shake away the truth. I placed my palm flat on the documents, steadying them. "I lied to no one," I said softly. "I just didn't need to prove myself to people who judged by appearances." Evelyn's keychain was warm in my other hand. Her voice whispered in my mind, "Patience. Let them reveal themselves." She was right. They had. Daniel swallowed hard. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked again, his eyes glistening now. His voice wasn't angry. It was hurt. "I could have stood by you." I turned to him, my heart twisting. "I wanted you to stand by me for me," I said quietly. "Not for what I own." The hall was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Even the whispers had died down. People were staring, some ashamed, some fascinated. Wealthy faces wearing expressions they rarely showed. Uncertainty. Her father's breathing grew shallow. His hands twitched as if reaching for something. His pride, his control, but finding only air. His daughter stared at him, then at me. Her lips parted, but no sound coming out. If you've ever watched someone's entire world crumble in their eyes, you know how heavy the air becomes. Subscribe now, because what happened next wasn't just a reckoning. It was a test of everything I'd built my life on. One of the men in suits stepped closer to the table, his hand resting lightly on the back of my chair. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was enough to tell the room this wasn't a scene they could rewrite. Daniel's hand hovered over mine again, but fell back. His eyes were locked on the papers, as if they were a doorway to a version of me he'd never met before tonight. The bride finally whispered, "So you came here to humiliate us." Her voice was small, but it carried. Heads turned toward her. Her words hung in the air like smoke. I met her eyes, steady. "I came here to watch my son marry," I said. "The rest of this, you built yourselves." Her father groaned softly, pressing his palms to his eyes. The weight of the moment bowed him forward like an old man. His daughter looked at him, horror twisting her features. "What did you do?" she demanded. He didn't answer. His lips moved, but no sound came. And just as the silence settled again, one of the guests at the far end of the hall stood abruptly. His chair screeched across the floor. "You think this makes you noble?" he shouted at me, his voice trembling. "You've humiliated them. You're no better." The hall froze. Daniel turned sharply to the man. My daughter-in-law gasped. Her father's head snapped up, eyes wide. I stayed perfectly still, my hand still on the papers. The man's voice echoed off the marble walls, a spark thrown onto dry tinder. Because in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about revealing the truth. Someone in the room had a plan of their own. The man at the far end of the hall stood tall, his tuxedo slightly askew, eyes blazing. His voice had cut through the air like a blade. He pointed at me with a trembling finger. "You've humiliated them!" he shouted again, louder this time. "You're no better than they are." The words echoed against the marble, bouncing back to him. I kept my hands flat on the papers, my heart beating a slow, steady drum in my chest. Around him, guests shifted uneasily, glancing between us like spectators at a match they hadn't bought tickets for. Even the men in suits angled their heads slightly, as if ready to intervene. The accuser's face was flushed, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead. He looked at me like a man desperate to prove something, desperate to stop the unraveling that was already too far gone. His voice cracked on the next words. "This isn't justice. This is cruelty." Her father lifted his head from his hands, eyes widening. "Sit down," he hissed at the man, but his command held no authority anymore. His own power had already bled out on the table between us. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Who are you?" he asked sharply, his voice slicing through the tension. For the first time that night, my son's voice had steel in it. His wife flinched, staring at him, unsure of this man she had married. The accuser didn't answer Daniel. His eyes stayed locked on me. "All these people," he said, sweeping his arm around. "You've just made them afraid. Is that what you wanted?" His words vibrated in the silence like a plucked string. I rose slowly, my chair whispering across the floor. The papers on the table fluttered with the movement. I let my hand rest at my side, Evelyn's keychain biting softly into my palm. "I didn't come here to make anyone afraid," I said quietly, my voice carrying nonetheless. The bride gasped, her mascara streaking further down her cheeks. "Then why?" she demanded. Her voice was trembling now, not angry, but shaken, stripped bare. "Why bring this here?" I met her eyes. "Because truth doesn't wait for a convenient time," I said. "And because dignity has a cost." My words were calm, but each syllable landed like a stone dropped in still water. The man in the tuxedo took a step closer, his shoes clicking sharply against the marble. "You think you're teaching them a lesson," he sneered. "But you're destroying your own son's wedding." His voice cracked on the last word. Daniel flinched. He turned to me. "Dad?" His voice was quieter now, pleading. Is that true? I looked at him, steady. I didn't destroy this, I said softly. I just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken. Whispers spread through the crowd again, louder this time. Who is that guy? Why's he defending them? Is he part of it? The words darted around like small, frantic birds. Her father pushed himself up from his chair, leaning heavily on the backrest. His voice was hoarse. He's nothing, he muttered about the accuser, but there was a tremor in his tone. He knew him. If you've ever watched people scramble to rebuild a lie while it's collapsing, you know the frantic energy that fills a room. Subscribe now, because what happened next didn't just expose the truth. It pulled someone new into the fire. The accuser's eyes flicked to her father. Tell them, he demanded. Tell them who I am. His hands shook slightly as he gestured, but his voice rose. Tell them why you're really afraid of him. The bride turned to her father, her eyes wide. What's he talking about? She whispered. Her hand clutched Daniel's arm, seeking an anchor. Daniel's face was pale but rigid, his jaw set. Her father's lips moved soundlessly for a moment. Enough, he muttered finally, but it was too soft, too late. The room had already shifted again, attention swinging toward the man in the tuxedo. I took a single step forward, my shoes clicking softly. If you have something to say, I told him calmly, say it. Let everyone hear. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. You think you're the only one with secrets? His eyes glinted with something sharp. Resentment, maybe, or opportunity. You're not. You're just louder. Daniel's fingers dug into the tablecloth. Who are you? He asked again, louder this time. His voice didn't tremble now. He sounded like a man who'd finally found his spine. The accuser's mouth opened, then closed. He hesitated, glancing at the two men in suits. For a second, he looked like he might sit down. But then he straightened his shoulders and spoke. My name, he said, is Victor Hale. A ripple moved through the crowd. People exchanged glances. The name meant something to some of them. Whispers hissed across the hall. Her father went pale again. Sit down, he hissed, louder now. But there was panic in it. Victor, sit down. Victor ignored him. His gaze stayed locked on me. And your acquisition, he said, voice rising. Didn't just buy his company. It bought mine too. Gasps burst from the guests. The bride blinked rapidly, confusion twisting her features. Daniel stared at Victor, then at me, his mouth opening but no words coming. Victor took another step forward. You think you're a savior, he said, his voice shaking but fierce. But you've ruined more than one family tonight. I stood still, letting his words wash over me. My pulse was steady, my face calm. Families, I said quietly, ruin themselves. Victor's jaw clenched. He opened his mouth to speak again, but before he could, one of the men in suits stepped forward and whispered something in my ear. I nodded once, my eyes still on Victor. The hall held its breath. The chandeliers flickered, a tremor of light across the marble floor. Because what my man had whispered wasn't about Victor at all. It was about something waiting just outside the hall, something that was about to walk in and change everything again. The doors at the far end of the hall creaked open with a long groan, and every head turned at once. Cold night air spilled into the warm glow of the reception, carrying with it the faint smell of rain. A figure stood framed in the doorway, silhouetted by the streetlights outside. For a moment, no one breathed. Victor Hale froze mid-sentence, his mouth still half open. His eyes widened as though he had seen a ghost. Even the men in suits stiffened, their posture shifting subtly, alert. My grip on Evelyn's keychain tightened, the metal biting into my palm as I waited to see who had come. The bride gasped, her hands flying to her face. No, she whispered, her voice trembling. She can't be here. Her mascara-smeared eyes darted toward her father, searching for confirmation, for denial, for anything at all. Her father groaned softly, his shoulders collapsing inward. He muttered something too low for most to hear, but I caught it. Not now. Not tonight. His words tasted like dread. The figure stepped forward into the light, and the whispers surged through the crowd like wildfire. A woman. Tall. Graceful. Her dark hair pinned back, a string of pearls gleaming at her throat. Her eyes were sharp, her mouth set in a thin line. She walked with purpose, heels striking the marble floor in crisp rhythm. Her voice rang out before anyone could stop her. "Congratulations," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "A wedding fit for liars and cowards." The hall erupted in gasps, chairs scraping, glasses rattling. She had thrown a match into a room already soaked in gasoline. Daniel looked from me to her, his face pale with confusion. "Who is she?" he whispered. His wife turned her face away, her lips pressed together, as though silence could erase the truth already walking toward us. I studied the woman carefully, though inside I already knew. I had seen her once before, across a boardroom table, her name written neatly under legal agreements. She had been part of the signatures, part of the empire shifting beneath their feet. She wasn't here by accident. The bride stood abruptly, her chair tipping over with a crash. "You don't belong here," she shrieked, her voice breaking. But the tremor in her words betrayed her fear. She knew this woman, and she knew why she had come. Her father pressed a trembling hand against his forehead. "Please," he muttered, "don't do this." His voice cracked like glass under pressure. The guests leaned forward, their curiosity feverish now. No one cared about decorum anymore. They wanted blood. If you've ever seen a lie unravel in front of an audience, you know how fast it can all collapse. Subscribe now, because what this woman revealed next made the cruelty they'd thrown at me look like child's play. She stopped just short of the head table, her eyes sweeping the room with disdain. "You sit here pretending to be royalty," she spat at the bride's father, "but you hide your filth behind money and titles." Her words struck like lashes, each one sharper than the last. Victor Hale took a step back, his confidence faltering. "Not here," he whispered to her, but she ignored him. Her gaze shifted to the bride, pinning her like a hawk pinning prey. "And you," dressed in white as if innocence could be bought. The bride trembled visibly, her hands clutching at the fabric of her gown. "Stop," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, stop." The woman tilted her head, her pearls glinting in the candlelight. "You wanted this spectacle," she said coldly. "Now you'll have it." Her eyes flicked toward me briefly, a spark of recognition. At least he has the decency to stand in the open. Daniel's hand found mine under the table, gripping tightly. "Dad," he whispered urgently, "what is happening?" His voice was hoarse, frightened but steady. I squeezed his hand back, grounding him. Her father rose unsteadily, his chair scraping loudly across the marble. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice shaking. "This is my family." His words were weak, hollow, collapsing under the weight of the truth pressing in. The woman laughed bitterly, the sound sharp as shattered glass. "Family?" she said. "You wouldn't know family if it stood in front of you. You discarded it years ago, when you chose greed over blood." Gasps burst from the guests, their whispers rising to a roar. The bride staggered back a step, her face drained of all color. She turned to her father, horror dawning. "What does she mean?" Her father's lips quivered, but no words came. He pressed his palms against the table as though he might steady himself against the tide of truth. His eyes darted toward me, then away, unable to face what was unraveling. The woman's gaze hardened. "Tell her," she demanded. "Tell her who I am." The air thickened, the chandeliers flickering as if even the light strained to hear the answer. Silence stretched, long and unbearable. The bride's chest heaved, her breath coming in short gasps. Daniel sat frozen beside me, his hand still clutching mine. Every guest in the hall leaned forward, their faces pale and hungry. At last, the woman spoke for herself. "I am his daughter," she said, pointing at the bride's father, "and your half-sister." The hall exploded in noise, gasps, screams, questions, the crash of a glass shattering against the floor. The bride's face twisted, her mouth opening but no sound coming out. Her father's knees buckled. Daniel turned to me, his voice trembling. "Did you know?" he asked. His eyes were wide, desperate. I held his gaze, but didn't answer. Some truths weren't mine to speak. The bride's scream ripped through the chaos, raw and broken. She staggered backward, her gown catching on the chair. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks like war paint. "You're lying!" she shouted. "You're lying!" But the woman only stood taller, her eyes burning. "Look at him," she said coldly. "He knows I'm not." And in that moment, her father collapsed into his chair, covering his face with his hands. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. The bride's scream rose again, louder, shaking the walls. And then she fainted, collapsing in a heap of white silk at Daniel's feet. Her body hit the floor with a dull thud, the sound muffled by layers of satin and lace. A collective gasp surged through the hall, chairs scraping as people half rose from their seats. The chandeliers rattled slightly, casting shards of light across her crumpled form. Daniel dropped to his knees instantly, his hands shaking as he tried to lift her head. "Emma!" he cried, his voice breaking. The woman who had declared herself the forgotten daughter didn't move forward, didn't flinch. She simply stood there, her chin lifted, pearls gleaming like cold stars around her throat. Her eyes, sharp as knives, stayed locked on the man who had fathered them both. Silence held the hall hostage, broken only by the ragged sound of Daniel's breathing as he tried to revive his bride. Her father pushed himself up slowly, his hands trembling, his face pale as wax. "Enough," he rasped, his voice cracking under the weight of years of lies. "This isn't the place." But it was too late to contain anything. His secrets were bleeding across the marble floor for everyone to see, and no words could stitch them closed again. I remained seated, my hands steady on the table, Evelyn's keychain biting into my palm. The urge to rise, to help Daniel, burned in me, but I knew this was his moment. He had to choose what kind of man he would be, with a wife whose cruelty had cut me deep, or with the truth unraveling before his eyes. Guests whispered feverishly, their voices like a storm of moths around a flame. She fainted. Is she dead? Half-sisters? How many children does he have? The speculation spread like wildfire, feeding on shock and gossip. Wealth always hides dirt, and tonight it had been flung into the light. Daniel shook her gently, his voice breaking. "Emma, wake up, please." His shoulders hunched over her fragile body, his tuxedo wrinkling, his hair falling across his eyes. He looked so young in that moment, so unprepared for the weight of truth pressing down on him. My chest tightened. He deserved better than this circus. Her father staggered forward a step, but the men in suits shifted slightly, blocking him. He froze, his eyes darting between them, fear etched deep in his face. "She's my daughter," he whispered hoarsely, but his words rang hollow in the thick air. He had forfeited the right to claim that title long ago. The woman in pearls took one step closer, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. "You can't run from this anymore," she said coldly. "Not with me standing here, not with her lying there. Your empire isn't built on success. It's built on abandonment." Her words cut deeper than any blade. If you've ever watched a truth burn through a room, you know how it feels. The air grows heavy, every breath a struggle. And what came next was the firestorm none of us could have predicted. Subscribe now, because what unfolded in that hall tore apart more than just one family. It tore through every illusion they had built. Emma's eyelids fluttered weakly, her breath shallow. Daniel exhaled in relief, his hand brushing her cheek. "She's breathing," he whispered. His face lit for a second with hope, but fear still lingered in his eyes. He looked up at me then, searching, as if I might have the answer to a question he didn't know how to ask. The bride's half-sister crouched slightly, her sharp eyes softening for the briefest moment. "You always thought you were the only daughter," she murmured toward Emma, though the words were as much for the room as for her. "But he had me first, and he discarded me like trash." The silence after her words was suffocating. Her father's knees buckled, and he collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. His broad shoulders shook. Was it shame? Was it fear? Or just the exhaustion of a man whose lies had finally suffocated him? None of us could tell. Daniel lifted Emma gently into his arms, her head resting against his chest. He rocked her slightly, murmuring her name again and again. His tuxedo was stained by her makeup, black streaks across his collar. His eyes burned with a mix of love and betrayal. The guests shifted, torn between pity and hunger for drama. Some whispered prayers under their breath. Others leaned forward eagerly, waiting for the next blow to fall. Human beings are cruel like that. They want blood, but they call it curiosity. Her half-sister straightened again, her voice rising. You all worship him for his wealth, she said, pointing at her father. But none of you know the filth behind it. None of you know the children left behind while he built his empire. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She was too hardened for that. Victor Hale, still standing nearby, nodded grimly. She's telling the truth, he said, his voice carrying. I've seen the files. I know the names. His admission set the crowd buzzing again, their voices overlapping in waves of shock and disbelief. Emma stirred in Daniel's arms, whispering weakly, It's not true. It can't be true. Her words slurred, her breath shallow, but they carried her desperation, her fragile grip on denial. She wanted the illusion back, even as it shattered around her. Daniel's voice cracked. Emma, please, just breathe. His hand stroked her hair, his eyes shining with tears. He looked up at me again, pleading silently for guidance. My heart ached, but I stayed still. This was his battle. Her father finally lifted his head, his face wet with sweat, his eyes bloodshot. Yes, he croaked. His voice was almost too soft to hear. She's mine. The words fell like stones, heavy, irreversible. Gasps rippled through the hall. Emma's body stiffened. Her eyes shot open, wide with horror. No! She screamed, the sound raw, tearing through the silence. She clawed at Daniel's arms, pushing herself upright, trembling violently. Her veil slid from her head, pooling on the floor like discarded innocence. Her half-sister didn't flinch. You wanted truth, she said coldly. Now you have it. Her pearls glinted, her expression a mask of icy satisfaction. The room trembled with the weight of revelation. Daniel held Emma tightly, but she pushed harder, breaking free of his grip. She stumbled to her feet, swaying, her dress dragging across the marble like a wounded animal. Her mascara-streaked face twisted into a mask of rage. She turned on her father, her voice shaking with fury. You ruined everything, she spat. You've ruined me. Her scream echoed through the hall, piercing every heart, shattering every illusion. The chandeliers flickered violently, as though the room itself trembled. Glasses toppled from tables, shattering on the marble floor. Guests recoiled, their voices rising in panic. The air felt charged, electric, ready to explode. Daniel reached for her again, his voice hoarse. Emma, please, calm down. But she slapped his hand away, her chest heaving, her breath ragged. Her eyes glowed with something feral, something broken beyond repair. Her father whispered, Emma, I'm sorry. But the words only fueled her rage. She staggered toward him, fists clenched, her gown dragging like chains. Sorry? She screamed. Sorry won't fix this. If you've ever felt the floor shift under you, you'll know what I felt then. Because Emma's fury wasn't just words. It was the spark that would ignite the final blaze. And as she lunged forward, the men in suits moved at once. But they were too late. Emma's hand closed around a crystal wine glass, and with a scream that froze every vein in my body, she hurled it across the hall, straight at her father's head. The glass flew through the air, spinning as light fractured across its crystal surface. Time slowed, every breath caught, every eye following its deadly arc. Then, impact. The sharp crack rang out as the glass shattered against her father's forehead, shards exploding across the table like sparks from a fire. Blood ran instantly, bright against his pale skin. Screams filled the hall. Guests scrambled to their feet, chairs toppling, heels clattering across the marble. The chandeliers swayed slightly, their glittering light turning the blood into something almost unreal, almost theatrical. Emma stood frozen, her chest heaving, the jagged base of the glass still in her hand. Daniel rushed forward, his arms outstretched. Emma! Stop! His voice cracked with desperation. He tried to grab her, but she jerked away, her face twisted in something between rage and despair. Her veil lay forgotten on the floor, trampled by panicked feet. Her father staggered, clutching his forehead, blood dripping between his fingers. His half-sister didn't move. She stood like stone, her expression carved in ice, pearls gleaming like silent witnesses. This, she said coldly, is what lies create. Emma shrieked, the sound piercing. "You destroyed me!" she screamed at her father, at Daniel, at the world itself. Her gown tore as she lunged again, but the men in suits intercepted, their hands firm but not cruel, restraining her shaking body. She fought like a wild animal, sobbing and screaming in turns. I stood slowly, my chair sliding back with a whisper. The keychain in my palm was hot now, almost burning. Evelyn's voice echoed in my mind. Dignity outlasts arrogance. I let the words steady me as I looked at the chaos before me. Daniel turned, tears streaming down his face. "Dad, please, do something." His voice was hoarse, broken. He was torn between love for his wife and horror at the truth unraveling around him. He looked so young, so lost. I stepped closer, my footsteps sharp on the marble. "Emma," I said softly, my voice carrying despite the storm. Her wild eyes snapped to me. Mascara smeared, her face streaked with sweat and tears. She froze in the grip of the men restraining her. "You think this truth destroyed you?" I said quietly. But the truth was always there. It only waited for light. My words were calm, steady, but they cut through the noise like a blade through cloth. The hall grew still, listening. Emma shook her head violently, sobbing. "I can't live with it," she whispered. Her body sagged against the men's grip. "I can't." Her father reached toward her weakly, but she recoiled, hatred burning in her eyes. Her half-sister's voice was cold steel. "You lived in a palace of lies," she said. It was always going to collapse. Her words were cruel, but they were true. The silence afterward was heavier than screams. Daniel pulled free from his shock and stepped forward. "Emma," he whispered, "I married you for love. Nothing changes that." His voice shook, but it was firm. "Nothing." She looked at him, her eyes breaking, then turned away. Her father slumped in his chair, blood still dripping. His empire shattered, not by papers, but by his own silence. He had no more words. His power had dissolved into nothing more than whispers and shame. Victor Hale stepped back into the shadows, his part in the play finished. His eyes flicked to me briefly, and I saw it. Respect. Reluctant, but real. He had challenged me, but tonight the truth had silenced even him. The guests sat again slowly, their whispers dimming into uneasy silence. No one touched their glasses. No one lifted a fork. They stared at me, waiting. The weight of their stares pressed against my skin like heat. I raised my glass one final time, the ruby wine trembling only slightly. "Respect," I said, my voice low but sharp, "is not bought with money, and it is not destroyed by lies. Respect is earned, and dignity outlasts everything." The hall went silent, every word sinking deep. Emma sagged, defeated, her sobs fading. Daniel stood by her, torn but steady. Her father bowed his head, broken. The half-sister stood tall, her truth laid bare. Evelyn's keychain burned warm in my palm. I felt her with me, her voice whispering through the chaos. "You did not fall, Charles. You stood." Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back. Tonight wasn't about me. It was about the truth. Daniel met my gaze, his lips trembling. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. And for the first time that night, I saw the man he could become, forged in fire and truth. The chandeliers steadied above, their light soft, golden, almost forgiving. The marble gleamed again, washed clean by spilled wine and shattered illusions. The night's chaos was ending, but its scars would remain forever. Emma collapsed into Daniel's arms, no longer fighting. He held her close, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Her sobs softened, the rage spent, replaced by exhaustion. She was broken, but alive. Her father sat in silence, blood drying on his face, his empire gone, his lies exposed, his daughters revealed. He was nothing more than a man now, no armor left. And maybe that was his punishment. The half-sister turned away, her pearls catching the last shimmer of light. She had spoken her truth. Whether they accepted it or not, she had reclaimed her place. She walked out slowly, heels striking the marble like a victory drumbeat. I lifted my glass to my lips and took a final sip of wine. Its warmth filled my chest, steadying me. I set it down carefully, my hand lingering a moment on the stem. Then I looked at Daniel and nodded once. It was over. And as the last whispers died, as the chandeliers cast their quiet glow over the wreckage, I knew Evelyn had been right all along. Dignity had outlasted arrogance. Truth had outlasted lies. What would you have done differently if you were in my place? Tell me in the comments. And if this story touched you, like and subscribe, because the next one I'll share will be even more unbelievable.